That I'm taking the talking stick and I'm inviting you to see that it's a stone. It's a stone that is from the Alps in Valais in Switzerland. So I'm based in Geneva. And yes, Brenno invited me to host that dialogue. And I'm very glad to see you all and to know that we are going to spend that moment together. So just briefly, I'd like to tell you that my intention for this dialogue and see how it resonates with you all. So the title of I and Thou comes from the work of someone who's named Martin Buber, and he is he looked at dialogue as an act in itself, you know, beyond the subject of what we can speak about in a dialogue. A dialogue is also an activity in itself which does enter in interaction either with what is already existing around us or with something that is somewhat unbounded and in becoming, you know. And so therefore there is that relation between the I and the it, which is everything that's already present and that already exists. And also there is the relation between the I and the thou, which is what is in becoming, what is unbounded. And so I think that these two elements are simultaneous, you know, they always happen together. But somewhat a dialogue is a place where we can make both of the two come together. And also we can somewhat explore the Tao, explore what is unbounded. I feel that, you know, Brenno and I have been doing dialogues which lasted 1 week, and we explored things which we would have never expected. And to me, dialogue as an activity, as a process, is somewhat reflected in this idea of I and Thou, even though it doesn't exclude the I and it, which is in itself extremely valuable and which can somewhat serve as a basis for the Tao to emerge somewhat. Am I making myself clear? Yes. So with that in mind, I'd like to invite you perhaps to introduce yourself and to say a few words of where you are right now and where you stand. And this can be where you stand in yourself, in your emotions, or where you stand in your physical space, in your anything. And then out of this round of presentation, we can perhaps just go on with a conversation which would take as a first impulse us introducing ourselves to each other. And then just see where this goes. And what do you think? Would that sound good to you? Well, also, then if it's nice, I'd invite you when you speak to make this gesture of taking the talking stick, and because then we know somewhat, you know, who will speak, and then we don't speak together simultaneously.
I'm going to take the lead in the place because my window comes right next to Matthieu, so I decided to come after Matthieu. Thank you for the topic. This is a swallow, mandurinha, which is something that I really like and symbolizes saudade, symbolizes swallows used to be the bird that would bring the sailors. And it has a deep meaning to Portuguese culture, and this is actually from an artist in Portugal that used to make these a long time ago. So anyway, so this will be my talking stick. I think, Matthieu, what you bring as a topic is very interesting. And when I joined these sessions, I didn't know what I would be talking about, but actually, you asked us to give a little bit of context of, I would say, not about us or not about who I am or what I do for a career or for life, but how my context plays a role in being here today, talking with you guys and talking on this topic. So my company is called Dialogy, and I invented a word because it's dialogue with the logics behind the logia, right? and also technology, because then it's communication and digital marketing and all of that. So dialogue is a big part of my life, the same way as communication. Usually I say that communication is dialogue, dialogue is learning, and learning is constant evolution, because a monologue doesn't necessarily teach. You will memorize maybe part of what the person is saying, but until a dialogue happens, you do not apprehend the concepts until you need to debate on it, until you need to make it yours. There was this writer that came with the term. It's a Stranger in a Strange Land. I don't know if you guys know the book, and he has the term grok, and understanding to a point where the concept or the information becomes part of you. So to me, this all ties up to dialogue. You mentioned, Matthieu, that sometimes you have a dialogue that lasts a week with someone. I feel that I have dialogues that have lasted my whole life, and I'm not sure if I'm going to end them before I die. You know what I mean? Because, and I have kids. I don't know if some of you have kids here. So, and then I put one of my kids on a debate team, and not sure if that was a good thing or a mistake, because now we have long debates at home. But I don't think that I ever want to finish a dialogue if the subject, the topic is important enough. The really, 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 really important topics, I don't feel you'll ever end debating or talking or having dialogues on it. So, yeah. So I would say the way you placed it, it's kind of two ways on a scale, right? The self and the exterior. May it be the topic, may it be the other intervenient on the dialogue. And I feel that it's a constant shifting, right? It's like listening and talking, and that moment when you achieve balance. That's when, when you're having a conversation with someone and you see the kindle of understanding on the other person. I think that's the moment when you reach balance on a dialogue. So anyway, so all of this to kind of maybe ask if any of you have topics that you feel that you've been debating or talking or dialoguing on it your whole life, besides religion and besides politics, because those are so global and so constant in our lives. Sometimes I think, is there like a small topic that it's the continuity of the persistence and consistency of existence in your life that makes a small thing actually a rather important thing at the end of life. So anyway, so that was it. I'm not sure if I was clear enough, but
thank you, Luisa, and also thank you, Matthieu, for facilitating this room. I will jump right to what Luisa just said, because I find it interesting. I find this idea of the learning process really interesting, because the learning process is something that is unlimited. Is you can never achieve something that you know completely. It's always we gather pieces of information from dialogues, from encounters with different people or species. And yeah, for me, for your question, something I was dialoguing a lot in the last years is the idea of collaboration, and the idea of this collaboration that is also a learning process through the making. Because what was interesting me is how to collaborate, and how to collaborate in, let's say, in harmony, which is something that is hard to achieve when there are various of voices coming together, different voices, if we think of. And yeah, in the last days, it's also interesting the topic that you brought, Matthieu, because in the last days I was actually thinking a lot about the idea of communicating and coming into dialogue, but not necessarily with human. Like, how do we bridge this gap between the non-human? How do we actually translate this language that we cannot really talk? And this I was like, yeah, debating a lot about, dialoguing a lot about this collaboration with non-human, because sometimes there is this project that's saying like we're collaborating with nature, but in the end of the day is basically again exploiting nature and using nature as a collaborator. And so it's really interesting into the idea of how to dialogue with non-human in a way that we cannot really verbally talk, but maybe more energetically or in a different way.
I first of all want to just appreciate most of us are, well, I'm not in Europe, but quite close to Europe. And then to see everyone speaking English in such a clear way, I just feel this connection kind of around the Mediterranean where there. I resonate with both of Gao and Louisa said, but I want to probably first bring a little bit of a context. And I think the key word for my context could be language. So, and I think Gao also said we have verbal communication, which is very much based on the way we have a language. And a lot of time, the communication, the dialogue happen beyond just the words. And this is the field that I think I'm so used to hanging on in my mind before. And then I have trouble sensing into the deeper layers, the other non-verbal layers. And this is the area I really want to step into more. And then coming to this place is a little bit of a serendipity. Like probably none of us knows who we're gonna meet. And I'm kind of curious, are we able to communicate a little bit deeper than the language? And I want to say a little bit more on language, then I will pass the talking stick back to the center. So I'm new in Israel. I'm not Israeli. I don't speak the language, and I'm trying to learn Hebrew right now. And it just, there is the feeling of, wow, the communication is certainly beyond the language, but I'm handicapped, even though people here speak really good English. But if I really want to get to the nuances, to know what they are talking, no, I can't get it. Even if they were trying to speak English, there's still that gap. So certainly there are things I have to leverage on the language, but it's also beyond language. And then there was the video of training us, like the video, how to dialogue. And there was a word on discussion versus dialogue. I'm Chinese, so I was thinking, wow, in Chinese, dialogue and discussion, which words I should translate it into, which word exactly. So what I'm feeling is language is absolutely sacred. Without language, I think we are much less human than what we can be. It's a sacred tool, but language is not everything. language has its limitation. So when I'm thinking of discussion, I didn't think that's a negative connotation in my head. But in the video, to demonstrate a difference, so we wanted to dialogue. We didn't want to discuss. So with this limitation, and we're trying to communicate beyond this limitation, it's just something fascinating. So I'm passing it back to the center.
I'm holding a letter opener. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's from, because it's actually my brother-in-law's. And to Matthew's original question about today and sort of our time together today, just as context, because we're all providing context, which I think speaks to Tina's point here. I'm in my brother-in-law's house right now. We've come here for a little escape from the big city because we're lucky enough to do so. And so I'm in his office, which is not my normal context. It's not my home. And so to say where I stand is that I'm in a context that is totally not my normal context, and it's affecting me. It's especially affecting me because I'm conducting a sort of, work-like session, let's call it, or an intellectual dialogue, while I'm also trying to be a mom and a sort of like, I'm devoting some time to some personal time today to family. So that's some context. And I think the word context, which we've used a lot today, in sort of weaving through some of the thoughts that have already been shared, I love this question of I and thou, because I work from a place of we. My sort of whole being, physically and language-wise, starts with we. I think about how people behave and how folks behave at scale, and culture and society sort of working with the non-human, as Gal said earlier. And as I've been listening, the quote that comes to mind for me is from Donna Haraway, who is a famous feminist anthropologist from UC Berkeley for many years, who has this beautiful quote that says that technology is not neutral. We are inside what we make. And it matters which connections get made and unmade. And so when I think about I and it, and I and thou, and my general sort of sense of coming from a place of we, is that we are all working in context. We always have a context around us, whether we're using our language or we're watching each other's bodies. I think what I'm hearing and what I love is this idea that humanity is sort of the center right now, and for better or for worse, right, in the Anthropocene. So as we're talking about I and thou, and I'm using what appears to be a letter opener carved out of wood that appears to represent an African queen, I think about, the context of we, where we each come from, how that affects how we interact and dialogue with one another, and how each of us is constantly in a dialogue with our environment and our context, and how that shapes our behaviors, especially when we're in contexts that aren't comfortable or familiar to us. So that's, I don't know, that's what's come to mind to me as I'm listening. I'm really excited to see where this dialogue goes now.
Thank you all for what you've been sharing. It's amazing. I'm thrilled by all of what you're bringing, and also, just like you, I'm both amazed but also excited, and also a bit in the uncertainty regarding what's being co-created here. To give you a context, so here I am in my flat in Geneva. I've been having a very long week. I work as a psychologist and for university, and we started the semester this week. So it's been lots of new classes on Zoom, lots of things on Zoom all the time, and also lots of organization, and it's been amazing. I've been very, very happy to start again the semester. And yeah, this weekend has been also for me a weekend of like breathing out and taking time for myself and my family. Tomorrow I have the birthday of my brother. And today I've been just like, before I came to this dialogue, I was just running and I was just doing sport and just emptying my mind and getting ready somewhat to be with you all. And I've been noticing that the spring is coming, and it's amazing to see the little sprouts everywhere. But somewhat also, I'm feeling not completely okay with that, because I feel it's too early, and I wish it would come later. I wish there wouldn't be all these newspaper articles telling me that it's been the warmest days since we started recording temperature in Switzerland. And yeah, so that's where I stand. Yeah.
I'm super excited to be here, by the way. First of all, the things that you all said, everything makes sense, which I'm usually, everything makes sense to me, unless it's evil by itself. And even that makes sense, because that's related to the issues of the person who's doing the evil act, because everything else makes sense. I lived in California, in San Francisco, for 10 years. So, Tina, I totally understand your reference to cultural handicap, because I was fluent in English before moving there. Everyone speaks English in there. Everyone is super welcoming. California, it's just California. San Francisco on top of it. So, and everyone is from somewhere else. So we get to a point, I don't see races, I don't see differences anymore. If I met a person, when I meet a person, I see a person. So I may get curious about the story that the person brings, but I don't necessarily think, where are you from? Or I just see the whole. So San Francisco has that ability. And even so, there was a barrier. There was, I didn't belong. And it wasn't the lack of communication or the lack of language. It was the cultural references. And it was, there's these silos, right? Of your culture, who you are, your story, the society you were brought up, that shapes you and makes you who you are. And that's not wrong. It's the reflection of your family, your religion, etc., etc. There, because everyone was from somewhere else, it's implicit, the acceptance of everyone, because we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same situation. We are all feeling a little bit that we don't belong. So we just try to find, I was hanging out a lot with Brazilians. I was hanging out a lot with Catholic people at the time, because Portugal was very Catholic. So you find your place. I was working with innovation and startup acceleration. So of course I was hanging out with young people that have traveled a lot, same way as I have. So you find your common ground. So you find silos of communication and silos of language, where the language is not the language per se, it's the nonverbal, which brings me to what I would like to place here, kind of on this dialogue ad. It's what Gail was saying about the non-human and how to communicate with the non-human existence that has been existing, like animals and the planet and a lot of things, and with the need to find a common language, right? And with Climate change, for example. One of the topics that I've been diving into lately for work reasons has been climate change, has been the world, the planet. I've always had a little bit of advocacy in me, but now I am professionally diving in numbers and facts, and it's appalling. So when we think that we're getting to this globalization where we're all going to be part of the world, we already are. The pandemic came to show us that, right? That we need to work as a global team in order to survive the challenges ahead. I have kids. I worry about how it's going to be in 2030, in 2040, in 2050. I have professionally, I'm handling and dealing with goals, strategic goals and political goals and world goals that are talking about 2050, which I'm going to be an old lady. So anything that I do, I'm doing it for my kids, the kids of my kids, and etc. So we need to work as one. And then we have these silos of language, and then we have all of this. And then we need to acknowledge the existence of the non-human. So when you add all of this together, I would say, and that's maybe the topic for us, that maybe empathy is the only tool and the only and I'm a strong believer of love, not of love only in the romantic love romantic, that's important as well, but love as an expression of evolution. When you're able to love yourself, it means you evolved to, in terms of self-development and all of that, to really love yourself. When you love your job, it means that you evolved to a point where you know what you want to do, you chose a career, you were able to navigate your career or your path or your choices to do what you love, or your struggles, because there's a lot of careers that involve struggles to get there and keep doing it. And also love for the world, for the planet, for legacy, for all of that, for education, for all of that. But in terms of dialogue, how do you translate that? How do you carry that transcendence of love into a practical act of contributing? And empathy, I don't know what you think, Gail, that if we're empathic with the world, with the non-human elements of who we are and where we exist, of our context, as Elizabeth was saying. And if we create empathy, we may be able to overcome the non-verbal or the lack, the handicap of language that Tina was mentioning. And it reminded me, as an example, we're doing Zoom calls, like Matthieu was saying, and we work doing Zoom. We talk with friends doing Zoom. Many relationships are compensated with Zoom calls. So I teach at a faculty here, and I mentor, and I do a lot of different things. And I used to be really good at reading the non-verbal communication of people, and reading the room, the audience. And even this week I was talking with some colleagues, and we're talking about doing a debate online, right, an event. But if you do a debate, you need a debate, and dialogue only happens with visual. For example, if you have a Zoom call that people come, they say what they want, and then they exit, visually they exit, and then the other person comes, and then the other person doesn't. You're not looking at the whole. And I organize events, so I kept saying, no, we need to find a way of having everyone on the same screen, because otherwise it's not a dialogue, it's not a debate, it's people doing presenting, because you're not reading the non-verbal language. And sometimes if you're having meetings with your coworkers, you miss out on that, because if you don't see the that discomfort that someone felt of something that you said, if you're not able to see, the hidden hands, kind of scratching the leg too hard because you're hurting that person's feelings or whatever, how do we move forward to a society that it's going to be way more remote and way more technological and digital, which is good, but how do we do that without losing the ability to have empathy and to address nonverbal? Shouldn't that be when startups are developing new digital technologies and new digital solutions? How do we, this is an opportunity where if we're inventing the new models, right? How does a psychologist keeps the level of empathy, even if it's a professional one, with his patients, right? With the people that he or she is helping. So anyway, this just came up. I don't know if you guys have contributions. That's it.
I can follow up quickly from here. I happen to be also working in the sustainable space. I used to come from shipping, which we pollute a lot, but also contributed to the globalization. And right now I'm working with an NGO completely devoting to the sustainable use of ocean through business leadership. So a lot of what Louisa said, I think if there's a chance to keep contact afterwards to do something together, I'd love to do that. But come to this conversation, I used to live in mega cities because the nature of my work, I used to live in shipping hubs. So Israel is one of the smallest place. I didn't put my city there because the whole of Israel is smaller than London. I think it's probably not worthwhile putting it up where I am. But being in Israel has a beautiful country with those microclimates somehow made me more connected to nature. I felt I was completely disconnected. I'm rat racing with my life. And now I have to force myself, but it become easier. And with the help from COVID, that somehow there is a gap opening, made me really, I used to talk to my friends, oh, we're heading to ecological disaster. And my friends here locally said, no, Tina, we are in a ecological disaster, not that we're heading towards. And there was a period of time during the first lockdown, I was depressed because of this feeling, and somehow all came together. I want to kind of put a question or invitation in the common space. My question is, how do we show up? And I think that's a little bit related to all of what we have said, related to the context. I can't pronounce the name correctly. Hildrens, forgive me. And related to what Louisa was saying, how do we really communicate? And Gao says, how beyond the verbal, how do we really show up? I feel, how do we show up as a family member, a daughter or son, or a father, a mother? How do we show up in our workplace? And the dialogue, a participatory way of engaging in the world, not like downloading or just teaching. Are we really participants? How do we really show up? I think if it's somewhat a deep question, and we can call it a spiritual question or not. I think if we don't solve that question, we're not going to solve the global climate crisis. I really feel it's so connected. It's the same thing manifested differently through my struggle with the language, with the local culture, through my struggle with how on earth human being we get us to where we are here, and the small daily things. Why the house is so filthy? Nobody washed the dishes.
Thank you both for everything you said. I mean, there is a lot of input here. Yeah, I feel like how do we show up is a big question, but I feel like, as in regard to what also Louisa said about the self-love and empathy, I feel like, and this also relates to the topic of this dialogue, I feel it starts with me. It starts with questioning yourself. What is this that I could contribute? What is actually that the environment or the partaker in my environment need that I could give rather than take. But if we go back to the self-love and the empathy, I think first of all, there is a lot of tools that missing. How do we actually initiate self-love? How do we give empathy to the others? Because I think this is also a bit of generational gap that I feel. I would talk about my generation. I don't know the ages here, but I feel that if I think about my parents' generation, there is a big gap of the reflective, of their ability to just deal with emotions and with themselves, and not being just focused on maybe work and what they need to contribute to society as a working system, but not as something that contributes to the environment. So yeah, I think that there is really, from stepping out from this I to the we, as also Hildert said in the beginning. I'm also lately more concerned with the we and how we act as a community, and how I enable my agency within this community. But it's really from the inside out, because if we think also about this idea of harmony in a group, it must have a harmony within oneself, this self-love, this idea of what I want to do in order to then reflect and be able to interact with the others, I believe. Yeah, thank you for that. I think I got a bit lost because there were a lot of things I wanted to respond about, but I just went to your final questions, Tina.
First of all, I have to admit that I'm a little discombobulated right now. This is context as well, because I can hear my 2-year-old screaming downstairs. So if I seem out of it, that's what's going on. Context is everything. But I don't want to say much because I actually want to hear more. But there's something struck me about the privilege of being able to be in dialogue, and the sort of how we show up as our best selves means something along the line. Gal, I think you've hit this, where we have to be comfortable with ourselves, or comfortable in our context, or ourselves in our context. And that it's often a privilege to be in that place. It takes a long time to get even close to it. Many people spend their lives, right, just being comfortable with themselves. And so the sort of being in dialogue with yourself, but also with other people. And I think empathy comes down to listening. So there's 2 things that come to mind, which is the privilege of being able to have a dialogue, and the privilege of being able to be comfortable enough to listen, and to continue to learn. I think there's something about that that's really fascinating me as well, that we show up when we are most comfortable with ourselves, most comfortable in our context. And that's a privilege for a lot of people, I think, to be in that space. And that in the meantime, when you're not in that space, what can we do to help support one another to get to that space? Not just in the moment, say in a dialogue moment, but I think maybe over the long term. I don't know. This is something I'm thinking about a lot. I'm going to move on now and listen to more.
Yes. I'd like also to invite you to speak whenever you like, independently of the implicit order that we've created, which is also nice to keep that order, but feel free to break away from it if you want to.
So if you say so, let's go back to implicit. Okay, later on, I'm going to go back to implicit.
Go ahead.
Implicit order, you mentioned, it's the implicit rules on dialogue and communication. So I just I used your allowance to break the implicit order, to say, let's talk later on about the implicit rules and implicit meanings and implicit norms in communication. You can go back. I was just making it I was taking your words to interrupt you and to bring another topic, but go back. Keep saying what you were saying.
I have a question now. This sort of goes to implicit rules. Tina mentioned earlier that we all speak English. I mean, that's an implicit thing right there. I mean, an explicit thing right there that leads to implicit rules that are specific to sort of Western European implicit rules. And then, Tina, you said that you wondered how discussion and dialogue translated in Chinese. And now I'm really curious. What are the words? And how do you write them?
I have to write in the chat now. Is there a chat? I love the question, and sometimes it's nice to like how to show up is a big question, but the narrative is where we really feel the big question coming through. I don't know if I really write about it would make any sense, but really for me, and I think if there's another Chinese sitting here, it might be different. Discussion and dialogue has this coming backwards and forwards. Both of them have this action. So if I'm sensing into that action, these two words doesn't have so much a difference. But when I'm reading them, when I'm watching the video, dialogue, there seems to be something more. Discussion seems to be more focused on words. So that's kind of where I have got to. In terms of Chinese, there's something really interesting. I don't know if any of you guys practice focusing, which is also in the psychiatry field, and then their image coming out. So if we really want to do something very well, there was a poem saying there was someone in a hurry going to a temple, and he wants to go into the door. The door was locked. So was he pushing the door or he was knocking the door? So we have one phrase kind of pushing and knocking at the same time. And we use that action, that phrase, we really trying to get something to the nuance of it. So, but that's neither discussion or dialogue. So sometimes things just couldn't translate it directly. I wonder how that is in all the other languages.
Well, my daughter took Chinese, so that was a challenge. But we have a word, for example, in Portuguese, which is saudade. And over the years, and it's known because international, because there's no translation. And it goes a little bit to what you were saying, Tina, that sometimes there's no translation, but there's always a feeling. Everything is a concept. And whoever already, Chinese, Japanese, all languages that are based on concepts have an easier way to understand that a word may mean something, a concept, a feeling, an emotion, a state, an action, and that it may be hard to translate it to other languages. English, Portuguese, all the other languages that have the same origin. It's sounds that make words, and that word means a specific object, a specific thing. So this brings us to linguistics and brings us to a lot of topics, right? But I wanted to go back to two things that I feel that in this dialogue are important for us to debate a little bit longer, or to discuss, or to dialogue. Because these three words, debating, discussing, and dialogue, or talking about it, right? And all the deviations from dialogue. They have, and I think it was you, Tina, who mentioned that they have a negative connotation. If we say discussion, and if we say debate is more academic, so eventually it has a little bit more of a formal and high value to it. But they're all words. What they're saying and conveying is an action. And to me, they are all dialogue. Having a chat with a friend sometimes turns into one of the best dialogues ever, because it's informal, your guard is down, right? Because you're just having a chat. And you're having a chat and you're talking with your friend, and sometimes a lot of wisdom comes out of that, because there are no implicit rules, or there's the implicit rule or the implicit norm applied there. It's casualty, it's casual behavior, it's informal behavior, so which usually you're not as formal. I'm very informal, everyone knows. I have no filters. What you see is what you get. But I maneuver in very diplomatic, and I've had, and now I'm back handling a little bit of that. So there's always that thing, should I let go of who I am and play by those rules, when in reality it is who I am and how I am and how I communicate that made people respect me. And at 47, about age, Gal, you were asking about age, and it's what brought me to where I am. So, all of that, and when we're teaching young kids, when we convey a message to our children, and it starts at age 2, it doesn't start at age 14 or 18, who you are and what you do forms, and Matthieu knows this because this is behavior and psychology, right? So he might be the best one to shed some light on this. That's what forms the implicit behavior and rules. That's what forms that child and that future citizen that then moves to another country and has a hard time handling with all the rest and with empathy. So all of this to say, maybe it is empathy through dialogue. May dialogue include discussion, debating, chatting, whatever. Maybe that's the missing piece that you were talking about, Gail, that you mentioned self-love and dialogue with ourselves. And are we teaching our kids to dialogue with themselves? I have long debates with myself. I'm a thinker, so I think about things, and then people say, "Oh, you're so rational. You're so good at auto-analysis, and you analyze your own behaviors and everything." Yeah, I need to understand why I did that. Why did I get mad at that person when she or he said something? So, it's that constant self-dialogue that led me to where I am. That I am empathic, at least I try to be, and the feedback that I get is that most of the times I'm able to do so. But it was a long process to get here. So how early on should we start dialoguing with our kids instead of just talking, right? Do we dialogue with our kids? I have long conversations with my youngster who's a teen at 13, and everyone says, "Wow, your kid is so wise." He always had, and so I think all children have all these amazing worlds, but maybe we're not teaching them to talk with themselves, and we don't teach them to talk with others. So maybe we could focus on the I and O on children at a young age. And that's doable, right? That's doable. I'm doing the thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I will continue on that because this is exactly the point that I meant with this gap that I, as a kid, didn't have these tools to dialogue with myself. I mean, yeah, communication with other was always easy for me personally, but I feel like this is exactly the point, that we need to give these tools, because sometimes as parents thinks like, oh, my kid is too young to talk about this and that, and there is a certain boundaries of the dialogue that a kid is getting, because sometimes he's not ready to talk about his sexuality, or he's not ready to talk about whatever it is. But actually kids understand way more than the adults think. They know everything, and I see it from my niece, like they know everything, you know, everything that my brother and his wife back then didn't want to talk about. They knew everything, and they came to me and they're like, ah, this is like this and that, and I'm like, well, yeah, you're intelligent enough to notice it. And then this really like yeah, sometimes I see kids that people would say like, oh, they are like adults, like they're so open, but they are intelligent, and a kid is what it is from the day it's born. So why not really giving them the tool to dialogue with themselves, but also really, as you said, with the others. Yeah, so this is, again, start with the I and going back to thou, and then expanding to the we.
Ilfred said something that, well, I've been taking notes of the amazing things that you've been saying, but she talked about the privilege of being able to have a dialogue and the privilege of knowing how to listen. So I don't think I've ever considered, yeah, it's a privilege. There are people that have a hard time talking, that have a hard time conveying their feelings, or they don't feel empowered, or they feel that, no, I shouldn't be talking about these things. It's not expected me to have these feelings and all of that, and these thoughts and these questions or these doubts. And so someone feeling the empowerment of saying what they want, this is it's transversal to everything, to your relationship. If you're in a relationship, you feeling empowered to talk to your partner about how things are, that's a privilege. You being able to say what you think and your opinion at your workplace, that's a privilege. It's a privilege that you have a boss or a leader that allows it, or a company that promotes it, or a society that promotes it, right? That's definitely a privilege. Being a kid that feels that he or she can say what they want at a young age at school without being bullied, without the teacher saying, yeah, that doesn't have a place here. Because we all know many teachers, they're on a schedule, they have a program to deliver, so they're not dialoguing with the kids, they're not having dialogues with kids. So all of these are privileges, and I don't know, this is one of the things that, and then the fact that we don't acknowledge this privilege cuts the empathy. Because when we're in a place of privilege, when we're our bubble, we assume that everyone else is on the same level, and they're not. So this is something that I'm going to take from this dialogue, and I'm going to be thinking about it later on and trying to see where I've made assumptions or I'm making assumptions on my day-to-day, not recognizing my privilege of at work, at everything in life, even with my kids, and the privilege that I'm doing and giving to my kids, and the type of bias that I may be promoting around me and around my kids, just by the fact that I've never thought that there's a thing as the privilege of having a dialogue and the privilege of being able to listen. So it goes all to what you were saying, Gail. Tina, you're so quiet. Say something. We're running out of time, so say something.
Yes, so Hildred has already been leaving us, as you have all seen, and we are 2 minutes away from running this dialogue up. I mean, thank you so much for this amazing content that you all brought in, to bringing your whole self, and you're making all these links between what we've been saying to each other. To follow up perhaps on empathy, I feel like empathy is both an asset and a danger somewhat, because I feel like empathy is fantastic in close relationships. You know, it enables me to understand my friend and to feel them and to respond to their needs and to have them respond to mine. However, when does empathy have its limits? You know, for instance, empathy is not sensitive to numbers. I will not be feeling empathy when I see a statistic of millions of people suffering, even though my empathy would be highly needed in this context. Moreover, my empathy will not be triggered by a conflict that happens far away from me and by the suffering which doesn't happen next to my door. So I feel like empathy is somewhat bounded to what is close to me and what is just, you know, like immediately present somewhat. But for everything that needs me or that needs my attention, but that is not somewhat immediately apparent to me, empathy is getting worthless. And so, moreover, I feel like empathy is motivated, you know. I'm much more motivated to feel empathy towards those I love than towards strangers. Anyway, I suggest, you know, that we are now like very close to round things up, to perhaps have one word to close up. And then I guess we'll say goodbye to each other and hopefully keep in touch. So we have our email address, you know. So from my side, at least, feel free to get in touch. It's been amazing to meet you. And what I will also keep from this dialogue is what Hildred said of it's a privilege to be in a dialogue.
Yeah. Just the fact that someone invited us, right? Because we all got invited to this. And the fact that we were invited, the fact that we were chosen, that's by itself a privilege. We are more informed. We evolved just in this 1 hour of having someone talking to us and bringing this perspective. And hopefully other people are watching or not. Even if it was just the four of us, the value of this 1 hour, it's immense. So yes, let's stay in touch. Let's do a second dialogue just between the four of us if we want to. But thank you, Matthieu. Thank you all.
So as a parting word, of course, thank you. Just have the possibility to connect with you guys in different parts of the world and have in the space of an hour, have a glimpse of something really beautiful. I feel this could be an opening if we have enough space. And yes, I noticed we have each other's email address, so we could take this on in different kind of forms and shapes. And I want to just say, let's all be empathy with ourselves as well. I think we mentioned we are all very zoomed out, but maybe between those being zoomed out session, a dialogue in some kind of form could carry on. and I'm looking forward to that to develop naturally.
Yeah, my stick of talking, I didn't discuss about it, but this it's a part of a clay piece I did about movement and evolvement, and yeah, as we said, like this dialogue, just it's just the tiny little bit, and I had here also a lot of notes that I would love to continue dialoguing with you. I feel it's a process. We just opened a certain space for dialoguing about the dialogue as well. And yeah, I'm very grateful for being here and to sharing this space with you and sharing the thoughts with you. And yeah, let's, as I said, be empathy, but also reflective to ourselves and to others. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talk to you soon.